Thales is often regarded as the first Greek philosopher. He lived in Miletus, a Greek city in Ionia, on the western coast of what is now Turkey. He is also traditionally credited with predicting the solar eclipse of 585 BCE, although historians debate whether he could actually have predicted that particular eclipse. But what makes Thales important isn't simply the things he may have predicted or discovered. What makes him important is the kind of questions he was asking. Thales took a look at the world around him and saw trees, humans, animals, rocks, water, fire, and countless other things. Everything appeared different from everything else, but at the same time, everything seemed to be changing. Take a human being. You start out as a baby, you grow up into an adult, you grow old, and eventually you die. A tree begins as a seed. It grows into a tree, loses its leaves, and eventually dies. Water can become ice, liquid, or vapor. Everywhere Thales looked, there was change. So this raises a deeper question. If everything around us is constantly changing, is there something fundamental underneath all that change? Is there some underlying principle that can help us understand the world as a whole? Rather than simply explaining each individual thing separately, he was looking for something more fundamental, a principle that could help explain the nature of reality itself, the arche. This brings us to an important Greek word, arche. The word arche can mean beginning, origin, source, or first principle. In this philosophical context, we can think of it as the fundamental source or principle underlying reality. Think of it this way. Imagine you are looking at a huge tree. You can see thousands of leaves, branches, and a piece of bark. But if you want to understand where the tree came from, you might look deeper to its roots, right? The roots aren't exactly the same thing as the entire tree, but they help explain where the tree comes from and what sustains it. The philosophical search for an arche is somewhat like looking for the deepest underlying principle behind the things we experience. So Thales was essentially asking, what is everything ultimately based on? What is the fundamental beneath all of the different things we see? And this distinction is important. The arche itself is not water. The arche is the fundamental principle being searched for. Water is Thales' proposal answer to what the principle is. According to Aristotle, Thales identified water as this fundamental principle. But why water? This is where things become uncertain. We don't have Thales' own explanation because none of his writings have survived. Instead, we rely on ancient, later authors who reported or interpreted his ideas. Aristotle, in his Metaphysics, Thales, the founder of this kind of philosophy, says it is water, getting the notion perhaps from seeing that the nourishment of all things is moist. Aristotle then goes on to mention the moist nature of seeds and connection between water and things that are moist. In simple terms, Aristotle is suggesting that Thales may have looked at nature and noticed something important. Life seems connected to moisture. Living things require nourishment, seeds are moist, and water is the source of moisture. So imagine looking at the natural world without modern biology or chemistry. You see plants growing after receiving water. You see animals and humans depending on water. You see seeds containing moisture before new life emerges. Water seems to be everywhere life and growth occurs. So from that perspective, water could appear to be something fundamental. However, Aristotle does not tell us that. Thales personally explained his reasoning this way. Aristotle says that Thales got the idea perhaps from these observations. That means Aristotle is giving us a possible reconstruction of Thales' reasoning. When we say that Thales identified as water as the fundamental principle, we should not imagine that he was making a modern scientific claim that every object is literally made of H2O molecules, meaning water. Thales lived more than 2,000 years before modern chemistry. His question was philosophical. What is fundamentally responsible for the nature and existence of the things we experience? So when you hear Thales thought water was the arche, think less about modern chemistry and more about the fundamental principle of nature. The important idea is that behind this enormous variety of things in the world, Thales was looking for something fundamental that could help make sense of that variety. But this creates a huge problem. If water is fundamental, how do we get everything else? How do you go from water to rocks, to trees, to animals, to fire, to human beings? Thales' answer doesn't completely solve the problem for us. This is exactly what makes early Greek philosophers interesting. The philosophers who came after Thales would ask whether water could be the fundamental principle of everything. Anaximander, another philosopher from Miletus, would eventually propose a very different answer. Anaximenes would propose another, which I'll make a video on them as well. So philosophy begins to develop through disagreement. One philosopher proposes an explanation, another asks whether it really works, and then proposes something better. I think this is what makes Thales so important. We know water isn't the fundamental substance of everything, but Thales was trying to look beyond what we see and figure out what everything is ultimately based on. He was asking a question that philosophy would continue asking for thousands of years. What is reality fundamentally? And that's something we can learn from today. When we encounter something complicated, we often focus on what we can immediately see. But philosophy teaches us to step back and ask, what's underneath this? What is causing it? Thales may have been wrong about water, but the question behind his philosophy still matters. What is really behind everything we experience? So, to recap, Thales was an early Greek philosopher Miletus. The problem: the world contains many different things, and everything changes. For example, a baby turns into an adult, a plant seed turns into a plant, or a tree, right? The question: what is fundamentally behind all of this? The arche, which is the fundamental source, the principle underlying reality. Thales' answer was water. We don't exactly know why he picked water. Aristotle suggests moisture, deeply connected with nourishment, seeds, life, and generations. Why Thales matters? He matters because his answer may have been wrong, but the question was enormous and will live for a very long time. What is reality fundamentally? Let me know in the comments. Anyways, if you enjoyed, be sure to like, subscribe. I have another video coming out soon, and we're making a series.